Good evening, everybody. My name is Giselle Arroyo. I'll get right into it. I'm the Youth and Climate Justice Organizer at Colorado Rising for Communities. I became involved with Colorado Rising in 2017 through Proposition 112, and then I officially joined the team in 2022. This movement really opened my eyes to the overdevelopment of fracking and fossil fuels in Colorado. Just having moved to the state earlier that year, I already had growing concerns for the safety and public health for our communities. We all deserve to feel safe in our homes, but it became clear that for many Coloradans, there continues to be fear and real negative impacts because of the industry. And I believe in the power that we all hold as individuals and as a collective. And while this work is incredibly important, I have to mention that my most important role is as a mother. I hold a great responsibility to uplift my children and all young people first and foremost. We would like to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you for being here for our Marginal Wells webinar. We appreciate your time, presence, and engagement. And we're happy to welcome you to learn more about what marginal wells mean for our school communities, student health, and safety. We want to take a moment to respectfully acknowledge that we are part of an institution that sits upon the land of the Cheyenne, Ute, and Arapaho nations. Currently, there are at least 48 tribal nations that are historically tied to the lands known as the state of Colorado, and who are the original stewards of this land. We have an opportunity to deepen our knowledge, relationships, and actions to address the historic and contemporary atrocities perpetrated against Indigenous peoples and nations and other marginalized communities. And we share this acknowledgement as a reminder that we can always do more to stand in solidarity with Indigenous nations and communities. In 2018, you might have been part of the 43% of Colorado voters who voted in favor of Proposition 112, a ballot initiative spearheaded by Colorado Rising. The ballot initiative sought to create a buffer between fracking operations and our homes, schools, waterways, and hospitals. During that time, the oil and gas industry poured almost 50 million into ads, TV ads, mailers, and more propaganda, fueled by corporate billionaire interests. At Colorado Rising, we believe in people over profit, and we're continuing to challenge industry misinformation and empower everyday people, youth, and impacted communities. This helps ensure that our communities most impacted by pollution and climate change have a powerful voice in decisions that affect their lives. Since Prop 112, we have grown into a powerful grassroots movement, working alongside communities across the state to support residents and students in the fight against oil and gas development happening in their neighborhoods and schools. We help protect the right to clean air, safe water, and a healthy future through people powered grassroots organizing, legal advocacy, and public education. By combining innovative data analysis with powerful storytelling, we bring complex and often hidden information to life that inspires action from community members across the state. And we understand that centering young people, especially those from historically marginalized communities, is essential to building a more just and inclusive future of environmentalism. By integrating equitable opportunities and education around advocacy and health, I help guide our Youth Advisory Committee with the goal of empowering more youth leadership in the climate justice movement. Our Youth Advisory Committee supports the development of our programming and oil and gas campaigns, ensuring that our work continues to not only be youth driven, but also led and developed by youth who our programming aims to serve. Our last webinar, Spilling the Truth, was a deep dive into Colorado's oil and gas spill problem. The webinar explored the scope of that problem, health and environmental consequences, the impacts on schools and families, policy and legal solutions, and the power of community advocacy. And tonight we're joined by a panel of experts and community leaders, all with their own unique perspective and lived experience to help provide more insight on marginal wells. We extend our deep appreciation to the panel and participants here with us today. And since I have already introduced myself, I will let Christian kick off introductions. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Christian Van Woudenberg. I am a data analyst with EcoCarto, and I work with Colorado Rising for Communities as a creative director and data analyst. My education is as a molecular biologist. I've spent 30 years as an enterprise software developer and have spent the last couple of years analyzing data around the oil and gas industry in Colorado. Before we get started, I wanted to go through a few of our community agreements for this evening. That this is a difficult topic with no easy answers. There's emotions on all sides of this. So we ask that we keep this a respectful discussion. And please, there are going to be presentations this evening, but we really do want this to be an interactive Q&A session as much as possible. So use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar to submit questions. We may answer some of them during the presentations as time allows, but we'd like to, as much as possible, have our panelists answer the questions so that everybody can hear the answer. If you have any technical issues or get dropped, please rejoin the webinar using the personalized link that was sent to you via email. And we're going to have a recording of the webinar available for everybody, and we'll submit written answers to the questions that we didn't get to in the webinar to everybody that registered next week. And I will let Jessica from the ECMC introduce herself and her team.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. I appreciate the invitation and the continued collaboration from last year's webinar and also this year's. My name is Jessica Chavez. I am the Environmental Justice Community Liaison in the Front Range. I am new to the role, at least a year and a half. Came from the Cumulative Impacts Rulemaking, and I am joined with my colleague, Steve Arauza, who holds the same position, but in the Western Slope. And I'm happy to facilitate today's conversation and presentation with a couple of the amazing SMEs, subject matter experts at ECMC, Mike Leonard, Sharon, and Diana, who will all be presenting later on. I have a slide for them to present themselves, so I'll do that when I have all three of them online, if that's okay, Christian.
Yeah, that's great. I will go ahead then and jump right in. So together with Colorado Rising, we have been digging into this issue of marginal oil and gas wells near schools. And I would provide a very basic definition. I'm sure our ECMC friends will give a more detailed explanation. But a marginal or low producing well is one that meets the criteria as laid out in the definitions of the ECMC 100 series rules. And basically it means that this well has reached the end of its useful life, that it's not producing much oil or natural gas anymore, and it's time to consider plugging and abandoning the well. One interesting wrinkle that comes into this is that there are new kinds of wells that are entering into this marginal status. Normally we think about, and what we're going to talk about mostly today, are marginal wells that were drilled in the 1960s or 70s or 80s that have been outputting very little oil and natural gas for decades now. And they are in that marginal or low producing status. But what's new is that on the left-hand side here, you'll see the production data from a well that's behind my house in Erie, where it was drilled as a horizontal well in 2017, but less than 10 years later is now classified as a low producing marginal well. So to see these two wells production on the same vertical scale, that in the last 10 years, this directional well has produced 400 times more oil and natural gas than this marginal well. So what is the problem with these marginal wells? First and foremost, research has shown that they disproportionately emit methane and other VOCs into the air, and they're at greater risk for leaks and spills. And the problem is that here in the Northern Front Range, where I and a lot of folks now live, we have this growing suburban corridor that has grown into what was previously an oil field. So we have built entire cities around existing oil and gas infrastructure. The problem is that plugging these wells is expensive. It costs anywhere from $30,000 to $150,000, and there's over 10,000 of these marginal wells that need to be plugged. And ultimately, there are 45,000 active oil wells in Colorado that will eventually need to be plugged and abandoned. Oil and gas operators don't have much motivation to plug and abandon these wells. The easiest thing for them to do is nothing, unless and until they come back into an area that was previously drilled with a vertical or directional well and want to drill and extract minerals with hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling. And in that case, we find them often plugging and abandoning 5, 10, 20 legacy wells in order to safely frack those minerals. The last wrinkle I'll mention is that operators, due to the rules and regulations about how minerals can be accessed in Colorado, will keep a well active to avoid jeopardizing a mineral lease. So here is the scale of the problem statewide. This map shows all 10,800 marginal wells that have been classified by the ECMC according to that rubric of, is it low producing for a lack of oil and natural gas, or is it in an inactive status? Has it been shut in for some time? But what we find is that not only is 80% of the oil in Colorado produced in the Denver-Julesburg Basin, 63% of the low producing wells are in this area as well. Other areas or basins with high concentrations of low producing wells are the Piceance, San Juan, and Raton basins. That's a really big problem to tackle, especially for us as a small environmental organization. So in order to wrap our head around a smaller problem, what we've identified are 432 of these marginal wells that are within a mile of Colorado schools. We know that living next to oil and gas has increased risks for health and safety within a mile. And that's really still too big of a problem for us to tackle. So now we have identified a more tractable problem, that we really know that the health impacts of oil and gas within 2,000 feet of our homes and schools is the greatest risk. So we now have identified 42 of these marginal wells that produce less than 2 barrels of oil per day that are within 2,000 feet of Colorado schools. So the goal of Colorado Rising for Communities Marginal Well program is to get operators to prioritize plugging and abandoning these wells. To give you an idea of which oil and gas operators in which counties are responsible for these wells, that over 80% of these low producing wells within 2,000 feet of schools exist in Weld County. And that's again because Weld County has been one of the fastest growing counties, not only in Colorado, but in the country. And that's in part due to the boom in oil and gas exploration. But it puts that contrast of an existing oil field with new development at a bit of a loggerheads. And that's the reason why we get to this problem where there's existing aging oil and gas infrastructure next to our schools. The other thing I want to note is that one operator, KP Kaufman, is responsible for almost half of these wells that are near schools. And in particular, the problem is that they have their asset range in the Denver-Julesburg Basin and across Colorado is overwhelmingly of low producing / marginal wells, 85% of them. To give you a bit of a zoomed in picture here is the Front Range just north of Denver at the southwest corner of Weld County. And 85% again of those wells in Weld County that KPK operates are classified as low producing. And in particular, you'll hear from a representative, Robert Aronoff, at the town of Frederick about how this disproportionately impacts communities like the town of Frederick, where KPK owns and operates 60 marginal wells, many of them near schools. So here are some of the schools that we've identified along the Front Range and a few on the western slope, ranging from Peak to Peak Charter School in Lafayette to Grand Valley Middle School in Parachute, all the way up to Bella Romero Academy of Applied Technology in Greeley. And here are some of the particulars. So Kenneth Homyak PK-8 in Dacono is one of the top 10 most impacted schools by oil and gas infrastructure, low producing wells, and oil spills. There are 5 marginal wells within 2,000 feet of the school, and there are 28 marginal wells within 1 mile. This is one of the wells that these old pump jacks dot the landscape throughout Weld County. And this well in particular is identified as low producing because it produces less than a half barrel of oil per day, and it's about 1,000 feet north of the school. My next example is Legacy Elementary School. That each of the bullseyes here on this map are a low producing well. And all 3 of the low producing wells within 2,000 feet of this school are also owned and operated by KP Kaufman. In particular, the grant number 4 well here is less than 600 feet north of the school and has been shut in since March of 2021. So it's been inactive and sitting next to the school for 5 years now. And finally, I'll talk about Peak to Peak Charter School in Lafayette, that they're on the southwest edge of the Denver-Julesburg Basin, and there aren't many active oil wells at all near the school or within the city of Lafayette. As a matter of fact, all 8 of the oil wells within the municipal boundaries of Lafayette are classified as low producing, and they're owned and operated by Extraction Oil and Gas. So the community of Peak to Peak Charter School and the city of Lafayette have a unique opportunity to negotiate with a single oil and gas operator to get all of these wells plugged and abandoned. This is the Simpson MD 2-7 well that sits in a field north of Peak to Peak Charter School. And you can see it's not producing much, if any, oil or gas. So what do we do about this problem of these 42 wells that we want oil and gas operators to prioritize for plugging in and abandonment? It's easy to ask, it's hard to enforce. So that's why we have this webinar today. I don't have all of the answers, and I'm so interested in hearing from our experts at the ECMC about what community and what the ECMC as a regulatory agency can do to incentivize oil and gas operators to get these wells plugged and abandoned. For us, as a community organization, we're really good at working collaboratively with community elected officials and folks at the ECMC, the CDPHE, the AQCC, and other elected officials at the municipal and county and state levels to encourage operators to do the right thing. One really interesting side note that you'll hear about more later is that the ECMC has a marginal well program where operators can apply to get reimbursed for the cost of plugging and abandoning marginal wells. But none of the oil and gas operators that I've identified that have wells within 2,000 feet of Colorado schools have applied for that program. So what have we done? We are teaching in classrooms. We went to Peak Peak Charter School twice in May, and we talked to ninth graders about hydraulic fracturing and the benefits and drawbacks, and the well that was near their school and what they want to do about getting that well plugged and abandoned, and how they can use the power of others to amplify their voices and to be heard. So what came out of that was a letter writing campaign. So I have either delivered or put in the mail almost 200 letters from students at Peak to Peak Charter School asking local elected officials, representatives of the school board, and in this case, the CEO of SM Energy, to please prioritize plugging and abandoning the well that's north of their school. And finally, we have a petition that we're going to be sending to each and every one of these oil and gas operators to encourage them to plug and abandon these wells by the end of 2026, because it really is the clear and proper way to mitigate the potential health and safety risks that these marginal wells pose. So thank you all for attending today. Together, I'm confident that we can get these wells plugged. And I'm so excited to pass off to Jessica and the team at the ECMC.
Yes, thank you, Christian, for the very good introduction to get us started on the background information on the marginal wells and low producing wells. Again, my name is Jessica Chavez. I'm with the Energy and Carbon Management Commission. Before I start sharing my presentation and you all see them on the screen, I'm going to introduce our subject matter experts for this evening who will be presenting, but also answering questions as they come up. I'll start with Mike Leonard.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm Mike Leonard. I'm the QA/QC manager here at ECMC. I've been with the agency just about 20 years now, holding various positions.
Thank you, Mike. And I have Sharon Shefflin from Financial Assurance.
Hi, I'm Sharon Shefflin. I am the Financial Assurance and Audit Supervisor, and I have been here since May of 2024 with a compliance background of over 20 years. I was the supervisor when it was COGCC from 2010 to mid-2013 as well.
Thank you, Sharon. And lastly, Diana Byrne.
Hi, Diana Byrne, engineering manager. I, like Mike, have been here nearly 20 years and all in the engineering group and mostly on the eastern side. Thanks.
Great, thank you all. I will start sharing my presentation and then we can get started. All right, so we will be presenting on a little bit on the definitions of low producing wells and financial assurance. The agenda, we already went through the introduction of our subject matter experts, but we'll introduce a little bit about the agency. Then we'll move on to ECMC production reporting requirements and calculations, followed by some information on financial assurance and considerations, and a very high-level overview of who decides to plug and abandon and the complicating, not necessarily complicating factors, but just the factors that go into it. And then once Robert from Town of Frederick starts and ends his presentation, we'll go into a Q&A. So as you saw, you met the team all from different units in the agency. Mike runs QA, QC as a manager, Diana Byrne as the engineering, and Sharon as the financial assurance and audit supervisor. So ECMC's mission overall is to regulate the development and production of oil and gas, deep geothermal resources, the capture and sequestration of carbon, and the underground storage of natural gas in a manner that protects public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. As you all have heard, ECMC has gone through quite a bit of changes, but when it was first created in 1951, it was the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, COGCC, that was created with 5 volunteer commissioners. In 2018 was the actual creation of the Community Relations Unit, which is the unit that I am a part of. In 2019 was the Senate Bill 19181, which changed the agency's mission to regulating. In 2022 was the creation of MERP, which I'll go into in the next slide. In 2023 was when COGCC was renamed to the Energy and Carbon Management Commission per the expansion of regulatory authority. Then in 2024, there was 2 big milestones that happened that I'll also talk about. But because of there was a $2.6 million awarded to that MERP program and the creation of the rulemaking Senate Bill 24229, which created cumulative impacts, and 2026 to where we are now. So as you heard, low producing wells, marginal wells, they're very expensive to plug. Because of that, there was 2 big funding programs that we use here at the state. One is through state funding, the Enterprise Marginal Well Plugging, which is MWP. And this is the Colorado Orphan Well Mitigation Enterprise, which collects mitigation fees from all operators to fund plugging, reclaiming, and remediating of orphaned and marginal wells. It's starting in 2025, operators are able to volunteer marginal wells to be plugged by the EMWP program, eliminating the risk of them becoming orphaned. The other program that we have through federal funding is the Methane Emissions Reduction Program. And this funding provides an opportunity for operators to reduce emissions, reduce financial liability, and to alleviate cost of plugging low-producing wells. And the objective of this program is to mitigate methane emissions from marginal conventional wells by assisting operators to voluntarily and permanently plug and abandon on non-federal lands and estimate methane emissions from MCWs from pre- and post-plugging operations, so methane reduction. This is a dashboard that is used to track the amount of wells that have been plugged through that Marginal Well Enterprise Fund that comes at the federal level. As of today, 55 of those wells have been plugged, so that this means that the operators are plugging these wells with the available funds, and it removes them from the state's inventory and it plugs them all together. So this is a map of the different wells that have both been plugged, are on the list, and soon to be in progress, planned or in progress. So like I said, 2024 was a big year. The funding of MERP came in. That was when ECMC was awarded the $12.6 million of federal funding to be used to provide grants to operators to plug marginal wells from the inventory. What also happened at the end of 2024, by December 15 of 2024, was the adoptions of the cumulative impact rules, which The adoption of the cumulative impact rules included cumulative impacts analysis on all new oil and gas development plan applications, expanded disproportionately impacted community protections, required community outreach methodology, and also included NOx and greenhouse gas reductions implemented into there. So why is this relevant and why am I here talking is it expanded the community relations unit. So it, on top of all of the other analysis that is required, not only from the applications from operators, but also to increase the amount of communication and collaboration in the different industries, was the creation of 2 liaison positions, one in the Front Range and another in the Western Slope. And our team's main responsibility is making sure that we elevate community concerns, we create consistent opportunities for feedback and dialogue, and we make sure that community input is considered in all decision making and elevating it to the commission. So making sure that your impact matters and making sure that we humanize the work, right? Knowing that someone like myself is here as a resource to information share and to elevate concerns from the community. That is it from my section of the presentation, the introduction of ECMC. Next, we'll move on to production reporting.
Thank you, Jessica. Talk a little bit about production reporting is because it's important as to the calculation for financial assurance. Operators have to submit a Form 7 every month to report the volume of fluids and gas produced from every well that they have from the time it's spud. And spud is a term that means they have started drilling the well. So when they start drilling the well, until it's been plugged and abandoned, and 1 month after it's been plugged and abandoned, they have to report production. Next slide. Can I move it? Yes. Oh, there you go. Okay. So we have in our definitions the definition of a low producing well. This is important because we've been talking about marginal wells and low producing wells. It's really important to note that low producing wells are a subset of what's considered marginal wells. So a low producing well has an average daily production of less than 2 barrels of oil equivalent or less than 10,000 cubic feet of natural gas. Marginal wells are wells that are less than 15 barrels per day and less than 90 MCF per day. So it falls under the stripper well category. After they put in their Form 7s, there's an automatic calculations that's made that determines whether the wells are low producing or not. And that's how we go into the financial assurance considerations. Go ahead. So financial assurance, it's calculated by the plan that operators are eligible for. And options are based on the number of wells, the depth of the well, and production. There's 6 different options. Option 1 and 2, well, option 1 covers all the low producing wells that an operator may have. So any well that makes less than 2 barrels a day or 10 MCF, up to 10% of the operator's total number of wells. After that, they have to have single well financial assurance for every well. And that does not include the out of service wells that they have put on the list to plug, and they have a specific timeline that they have to get those plugged. So moving on, option 3, option 4 again requires single well financial assurance for all the wells, unless the commission approves an alternative amount. They have to petition the commission for demonstrated costs, and the commission has to approve an alternative amount. Option 5 doesn't talk about single well financial assurance at all, but the commission does have to approve an alternative amount for all the wells. In option 6, it will cover up to 25% of the total wells of the operators, single well financial assurance for the rest. And option 6 requires a $40 million payment of financial assurance at a minimum.
Thank you, Mike.
Sure.
The next one is plugging and abandonment, P&A, and I'll keep it pretty simple. So who decides to P&A? It's either the operator as a business decision, or when it goes through the ECMC commission through a hearing, usually what happens when it gets elevated to the commission, it comes from the landowners, the property rights, or from the local gov, are the two main individuals and entities who decide when a certain wells go through a P&A process. And that is the end of our presentation, and I'll start sharing. And like Christian had mentioned, we want to present information, but we don't want to talk just at you all. We want to make sure that we have enough time to answer questions and make sure that we have an open dialogue. So please feel free to add any of the questions into the Q&A box, and I'll make sure at the end of all the presentations to have our SMEs answer. As a disclaimer, there might be some questions that we won't be able to answer right this moment, but I don't want to discourage anybody from asking their question as it comes up. So what I'll do, if I can answer the question, I will take note of it. And if it relates to, for example, of the article that was released from The Guardian a couple days ago, that will all be addressed at a July commission meeting. And I'll make sure Christian has all the information for that. But thank you all.
Awesome. Let's turn over control of things to Robert with the town of Frederick.
Thanks so much, Christian, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to Colorado Rising for hosting this important discussion on marginal wells. My name is Robert Arnoff, and I serve as the oil and gas liaison for the town of Frederick. I'm pleased to follow ECMC. They kind of gave their statewide overview and share how one growing municipality, the town of Frederick, is approaching these issues at the local level. I'll go ahead and share my slide now. All right. So just to give you a little context for our work, I'm going to go ahead and give a quick overview of kind of the setting of Frederick, where Frederick is located, and why oil and gas activity has been so significant in our community. Here you can see, really, Frederick is a rapidly growing community, and we're about 15 square miles as far as the entire town is concerned. And we're located along the I-25 corridor, as you can see here, in Weld County. And we sit in the heart of a highly productive area. It's called the Spindle Field, and it's within the DJ Basin. And because of this location, approximately 600 wells have been drilled within our town boundaries. That's, once again, 15 square miles over the years. This history creates really both opportunities and ongoing challenges as we continue to grow residentially and commercially. And then, really, given this extensive development history, we recognize the need for stronger local oversight. And this really led us to establish a dedicated oil and gas inspection program. Just kind of to give you a preview of what that includes, here's a tidbit, one slide about the results of our 2025 inspection program. And so overall, 2025 was the inaugural year of the oil and gas program, and we inspected all 220 active wells at the time. And to develop this program, we really collaborated as much as we could with state agencies, nearby municipalities, counties, other folks that have ran this kind of program before. And we gathered information from them as far as what they are inspecting for. We really created a criteria inspection list that includes signage, leaks and spills, valves and fittings, venting emissions, site security, combustible materials, and site housekeeping. Now, this isn't everything, but at the same time, given the situation in this area and just launching the program for the first time, it's almost like we're running triage out there. We're just kind of trying to document and understand what is going on. And then on the right-hand side, you can see this slide is obviously out of date. Civitas has since merged with SM Energy, but these numbers are still valid. And so you can see Civitas has a really high compliance rate. SM Energy, as far as 2025 wells were concerned, they're right up there. They're getting that A or A plus. Oxy as well, as far as their assets. And then we have KPK at the bottom here. So I'm going to move through some slides, but kind of just this kind of gives a little bit of a framework for if you see some information as we move forward, who we may be talking about, what operators we're really concerned about. And then just at the bottom here, as far as being a local government, it's really imperative to just say that Senate Bill 19-181 grants us the power as a local government to conduct this sort of inspection program and to do some level of oversight. But our authority really ends at the ground surface. So we're interested in like where these sites are located. And additionally, we're interested in all of the equipment from the ground level up. So that's a lot of the times the wellheads, the tank batteries, things like that. Generally, downhole is covered by the ECMC. And so I'll jump in real quick to just our overview of vertical wells. There's a lot of kind of numbers and data on this. And really what I want to draw your attention to is the pictures at the bottom of the screen, because you can see these wells are often corroded. They're sitting out there since many times the 70s. And they've sat like this for many, many years. And so you can see we have 86 active vertical wells that are in Frederick. And I'm going to use vertical well sometimes in lieu of marginal well, because in the town of Frederick, virtually all of our vertical wells are marginal wells. They are almost all low producing. 83 of the 86 fall into the low producing category. And any of the ones that are above the low producing threshold are just barely above the low producing threshold. So 23 of the 86 are shut in due to unresolved issues. And we only have one MIT on record for an active vertical well. And that occurred last year, and it did fail. That well has since been plugged, thanks to a lot of support from the ECMC and their enforcement division. 15 of the 23 shut-in vertical wells are overdue for MITs. And so we'd love to see those going. And a lot of those are significantly overdue for MITs. And then another caveat to that is, these active vertical wells have a 0% compliance rate within the town of Frederick. So oftentimes, as mentioned before, there's leaks coming. A lot of the times there's not much fluid coming up anymore, but there's still quite a bit of gas down there that can kind of bubble up to the surface. And so 14 of those vertical wells were discovered in 2025 as having really uncontrolled off-gassing. And then 100% of that was, once again, vertical wells. And so you're asking yourself, like, what can we do? And as Christian said, this is a really complicated situation. There's no really silver bullet, but some of the things that local communities can do to be proactive is, and it's really easy for me as the oil and gas liaison to say, hey, you guys should hire somebody like me. But really, you can do that. I highly suggest it. Make sure they're a qualified professional to conduct these types of site inspections, somebody that has good communication skills and is prepared, equipped, and ready to respond to community issues. And implement a local inspection program. That's kind of, Senate Bill 19-181 gave us that authority. And I highly suggest if you're interested in starting a program like this, you seize that right to use your authority. And so that's a similar thing to what we're doing. Obviously, we're out there. Our biggest concern is the health, safety, welfare of the community, the environment, things like that, just like the ECMC. And A lot of the times people say, oh, how are we going to hire somebody? How are, especially in this period right now, where's the funding going to come from? That's always the question. And many of these programs are funded by assessing inspection fees to the operators. And those often can cover the cost of this type of role. So if that's something you're interested in doing, you just know that it might not necessarily be as much of a financial burden as you might think. And then, of course, it's really important to engage actively at the state level. I watch almost every single ECMC rulemaking and hearing, and think that there's a lot of great information that comes from that. I'm also the local governmental designee, the LGD. And so as such, I try to participate where I can and encourage others to do so, especially in not only ECMC hearings, but CDPHE hearings and rulemakings. And then another thing that I'm doing is the ECMC provides notice a lot of the times when rigs are coming out. And so we track all those notices. We try to keep up with what's going on in our community. We're hyper fixated on Frederick ultimately. And then, you got to strengthen your local regulations. Senate Bill 19-181 once again gave us the authority to do that. And so updating your land use code with reasonable protective standards, and they can be more stringent than state minimums. That is really where a lot of authority comes from for local municipalities, is the land use code. And another tip, prioritize community engagement. I attend almost every single community event. I'm trying to get out there as much as possible. And that's really important because you can understand the community priorities around oil and gas issues a little bit better. Not every community is going to feel the same way about low producing or marginal wells, vertical wells in their community. Every community is going to have a little bit of a different perspective on what's going on and priorities around that. So the other thing, by attending and community events and engaging with the community, you're really creating that transparency that the community generally would like to know about these types of things. All right, and this is a continued slide, but 2 additional bullet points here. Number 1, address economic and welfare impacts. Advocate for timely plugging of marginal wells. And there's quite a few reasons why this helps out at the local level, but a lot of the times it comes down to development in certain communities. Once again, we're on the I-25 corridor. We're booming. Our population in the 90s was less than 1,000, and we're waiting for the next census in a few years, but I imagine that will be over 20,000 at that point in time, which is a significant increase in population here. And so it's kind of trying to manage how do you increase development in an area that's encroaching on oil and gas development that's historically been there. And so if these wells are plugged in a timely manner and done appropriately, it frees land for development. It protects property values. If somebody's got a old derelict well that's sitting in their backyard, it's probably going to affect their property values. And they might not even be able to sell that property. The property may be a dud. It really just depends on what's going on there. And then by doing that, we're able to support responsible community growth. And the last one here, this is imperative no matter really what you're doing. You build partnerships for this industry where we're at right now in the conversation that we're having. Collaborate with your counties, municipalities, CDPHE and ECMC. They've been great partners. Colorado Rising, that's a great opportunity as well. And then other stakeholders, the sooner you involve stakeholders in complex issues, the sooner they get resolved. So that collaboration and communication is really key there. But you can also share resources by doing so, data, and you can advocate for stronger outcomes. And down here, we kind of started our program as a grassroots effort, no big budget or anything like that. We're just relying on our $400 well inspection fee that's been on the books since the 90s to kind of cover the cost of this program. So all of last year, what I was using to detect leaks at these wells was EPA approved method 21. It was developed in 1984, 86. So about 40 years old, but it's literally using soapy water to detect leaks on pipes. So what you're seeing here, all of these wells are off gassing. All of them are leaking from various locations, but you can see the buildup of bubbles is really just the air passing through that media. And that's really it. My conclusion is that, you know, it's a multi-level partnership here, and that's the only way that we're going to really get stronger protections for our communities. And so I really want to thank the ECMC, and I really want to thank Colorado Rising for putting this on. Please feel free to reach out to me with any additional questions you might have. Here's my contact information. And I believe this is being recorded, so hopefully it will pop up later. But I'm always welcome to have a conversation with anybody, and we are happy to collaborate with anybody that's willing to collaborate with us. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, that concludes the formal presentation section of our webinar. So please, for everybody, use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar to ask any questions. You'll note that some of them have been answered already by myself and some of our experts. And of course, for any question that we might not be able to answer this evening live, we will follow up with written answers to those where possible. So the first question I have for folks at the ECMC, just to kick things off, Robert noted some pretty serious compliance issues with one operator in particular. What more can the ECMC do to bring operators like KP Kaufman into compliance in impacted areas like Frederick?
Thank you for your question, Christian. I think, Mike, do you feel comfortable answering the question?
Sorry, I'm struggling through trying to get the questions up. What was the question again?
Yeah. What can the ECMC do to bring operators like KP Kaufman into compliance in impacted areas like Frederick?
I mean, we have our enforcement, our compliance, our inspection and enforcement program. We just take them through that enforcement program, much like we've done with KPK and every other operator. They're issued inspections with corrective actions, and if they don't follow up, we issue notice of a lead violation. From there, if there's no what's the word I'm looking for, compliance, then we take them on in front of the commission for either administrative order on consent or order finding violation.
Good, thank you. The next one, kind of another easy question. What's the procedure for ensuring that plugged-in abandoned wells don't start leaking?
So
Either, Diana.
Diana can help there, but there's a procedure to that.
So recently with one subset of 19181, we do requirement of pause after placing your surface plug for a minimum of 5 days so that you can check to see if the well's adequately isolated. We've also upped the game in terms of asking operators to stop during that plugging operation to assure that any flows are stopped before we get up high in the well, so we have plenty of room to stop that. And then post-plugging, there's a requirement to look at it with, you can use the RMLD, you can use an OGI to assure that there's nothing no gas. I mean, liquids are pretty easy to see if for some reason they're not happening. But for gas, you can also turn them to soil gas monitoring, OGI, or RMLDs.
So a follow-up question I have based on my analyses of the kinds of inspections that ECMC inspectors take, that the majority of inspections happen at producing wells, and that plugged-in abandoned wells don't get inspected very often. Can you tell us why is that, and how, like in Erie, there have been 3 instances where we found wells where the plug failed, and there were, at least in one instance, explosive levels of methane detected in the soil. So how do we close that gap?
Well, this feels like we're transitioning quite a ways off of what the topic that we were given was marginal wells. So I think there's a
Yes,
variety
we'll
of
concede
things
that.
there. I would also point to, I don't know which 3 is the subset you're speaking to. I would look at them in terms of the age, the condition of the well when it was plugged, and what was in place for expectations then versus what the current thing is. If we and the operator have completed that plugging appropriately, in terms of prioritization as to when wells should be cycled back to look at, that should end up being extremely low on the priority list. That being said, I don't know what the 3 are that you're speaking to, if it's a 1964 plugging or a 1975 plugging that did not have the same expectation standards review after the fact that we now conduct.
Thank you. To get us back on track, a question here. For the ECMC folks, what do you think is the most compelling argument to get operators to plug and abandon these wells? If they have the funding through these financial assurance and marginal well programs, why aren't they doing it?
Thank you for your question. I think maybe Sharon, since it includes financial assurance. But I think the first part of the question might be, or Mike.
So there's, again, as I think it was mentioned earlier on in the presentation, there's many reasons why operators don't want to plug wells. It's one well may hold several hundred acres of mineral interest based on their contracts. So they don't want to plug that well and lose that that opportunity for that mineral interest. Most of the time, it's a business decision.
Good. And I think that also answers a question of what's the biggest roadblock to getting these wells plugged. A question for Mike. In terms of the answer to my question about holding KPK accountable in Frederick, you said the ECMC would issue orders. Where are the fines and the stop orders and the denial of future applications and permits? That, in my experience, also in terms of when notices of alleged violation and corrective actions and inspections are noted by inspectors and the enforcement team, it really is about getting the operators into compliance. And we don't often, for things other than like massive spills like the Bishop blowout, see fines assessed. Is that because it doesn't get publicized, or those fines don't get assessed?
So the fines do get assessed, and that report comes out, I believe, quarterly on our website with the enforcement process. a lot of those fines, you just don't see it. What you don't see at the hearings is they are on what's called the consent agenda. So they're not really discussed. The commission agrees with what the fine is going to be, and it goes on. The operator pays the fine, does the compliance. If the operator doesn't agree, that's when it comes to the point of, the cease and desist and the revocation of the operator's license and certificate to transport.
Yeah, and I'll note that I've got the complete list of all of those fine reports quarterly, all the way back. Oh, it goes quite a few years back. So that report is available, but sometimes a little bit difficult to navigate. Let's see here. What's next? Oh, for Robert. Is your compliance baseline based on ECMC regulations, or are there more stringent Town of Frederick regulations that are in place that give you kind of like additional powers?
I mean, so once again, going back to that Senate Bill 19-181, that's really what gives us our ability to run this kind of program. To be honest with you, we tried to run a program like this quite a few years ago. Actually, let me pull up. I think I can tell you. Yeah, so around the 2010 to 2012 timeframe, KP Kaufman did enter a lawsuit against the Town of Frederick for trying to impose their own inspection program prior to Senate Bill 19-181. And then they basically sued us, arguing that the local requirements were invalid under the specific facts of its operations. And so ultimately, by Senate Bill 19-181 getting passed, it gave us the authority to run the program that we've been trying to run since, the 2010s. And ultimately, what gives us our authority is that document. It's not necessarily the ECMC at all. The other thing that gives us the authority to run this kind of program is our land use code, which specifically grants us the ability. And then lastly, this isn't really an authority thing, but just to ensure that folks were okay with us accessing their private property to inspect these wells, I track down every single landowner in the Town of Frederick and have their express written permission to be on their property to do this type of inspection. So that kind of covers the whole gambit of our authority. And I'm trying to remember if there was another part to that question. Hopefully that answered it, Christian. Maybe you could help. Christian, maybe you could
It does. I have a good follow-up, though.
Okay.
It was very sad to me to see that you had to visit these well sites with a bottle of soapy water and to do leak detection on these old wells. What other more current technologies are available that really just a funding gap for you would close and make your program more effective?
So OGI cameras, typically FLIR, forward-looking infrared, that can actually detect the gas coming out of the well and document it. That is really the technology that we're not using by using the soapy water. But at the same time, soapy water is extremely effective. Do not feel bad for me. We're able to detect smaller leaks sometimes than people are able to with OGI cameras. So to follow that up, it is a funding gap, and graciously enough, not sure how people will feel about this, but we've been working really well with SM Energy recently, and they donated a camera to our program, which we're incredibly grateful for, and we've been utilizing it already. It's extremely powerful. As Diana mentioned, sometimes we work with developers for reduced setbacks, and we expose plugged and abandoned wells and collect some samples, ensure that they're not leaking and things like that. And so we're rolling that into our program as well, where, yeah, you can literally shoot a cut and capped well that's exposed and be able to see, is it leaking methane? Is it not? A lot of times you don't necessarily need that equipment. If you're bringing in a qualified liaison or inspector to your municipality or county or really whatever, oftentimes you can just step out of the vehicle and just say, hey, I can smell hydrocarbons. You walk up to a site, you can hear a hissing, and then you can use the soapy water to kind of like get down to where the actual leaks are coming from. But yeah, we're incredibly grateful to SM Energy for supporting our program and donating like such a nice piece of equipment to us that really bolsters our program. And yeah,
Thank you.
of course.
Next question here for the ECMC folks, which is more of a compliance question. If the ECMC has gone through their process of notifying operators who are out of compliance and the operator just ignores that process, what happens next?
So the notices of alleged if they don't come into compliance after the notice of alleged violation, there'll be a hearing that in which our enforcement team would ask the commission to revoke their license to operate and revoke their certificate to sell any product. So it basically shuts them down. They can't sell product, they can't operate.
And the financial assurance is claimed.
Good to know. Thank you. Next, related to fines, what kind of level are these fines? Is it just cheaper for them to pay the fines than to plug the wells? And if so, isn't that problematic? So I think to reframe as a more general question, can you give folks an idea of what kind of, like, how many dollars are attached to particular kinds of violations, if that's information you have at hand?
So I don't have that at my fingertips, but if on the enforcement page on our website, it lays out the penalty matrix. So there's a penalty matrix that classifies the fines into minor, moderate, and major. And then if there are any aggravating or mitigating factors, that goes in, that adds into the fine. So it's all laid out in our penalty matrix on our enforcement page. And I can't quote it right now. I don't have it. So.
Yeah, I want to say the daily maximum fine is about $15,000 for like the major.
We changed that a few years ago, and there's no limit to the number of days. There used to be a cap on days, and now there's no limit.
Yeah.
Can I ask a clarifying question, Mike? It isn't either or, correct? It would be both. They still have to plug the well, and now they have to pay.
Yeah, you still have to come into compliance. I mean, you still have to come into compliance and pay the fine. So that it's not you're right. It's not an either or. You can't come into compliance and ignore the fine. You have to pay the fine and come into compliance.
Good, thank you. And then back at a follow-up question for Mike, or who knows, on the ECMC side of things. Do you have an idea of how many operating licenses have been revoked by the ECMC?
I don't have that up on the top, at my fingertips. We can get that. Our enforcement team, they keep track of that, and it may be published on the website. I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get back to the person that asked that question. All right. That rounds out most of the questions that I believe we can answer live. Are there any other clarifying comments
Christian,
that any of our panelists want to make?
Barb was asking a question about tracking operators on the website. And what I want to say is right now we're in a complete overhaul of our database to make that a whole lot easier. If you know, I can show people a few things. Using the dashboard may not be the best way to track an operator, but there are some other tools that you may be able to use for individual operators. And if you want to contact me, I'll be out next week. But if you want to contact me, we can sure give me an idea what you want to look at, and we can sure do that.
Yeah, in the questions, Barb mentioned that it'd be really nice to see counts by operator.
Yeah, and it depends on the count. There are counts by operators in certain areas.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for your time. For our participants, there will be a recording of the webinar, and we will take note of all of the questions that haven't been answered and get back to you with written responses. Look for those by email in the next week. Thank you to our panelists for taking the time out of their evening to spend time with community. And again, thank you to all the attendees for your time and energy. This is difficult, and this is just the beginning in a continuing set of conversations. Our goal is to get these wells plugged and abandoned. And together, I think we can do it.
Thank you,
With
Christian.
that, yes.
No, I was just going to say thank you to everybody. I know that these are, like you said, very difficult conversations to have, and there's decades of work that needs to be done, but I hope you all know that we are always here to have conversations and me as liaison be a bridge builder to more information that might not have been readily available in the past. So always feel free to contact me, and I can put any community member in contact with whoever they're interested in communicating or learning more about. But again, I really appreciate you all also taking the time to listen to us, and thank you to all of our subject matter experts for both from ECMC and the town of Frederick, and Christian for hosting this webinar.
Thanks so much, y'all. I don't have anything to really add beyond that, but I really appreciate the opportunity to be included in this and look forward to really being proactive in this space instead of reactive. And it looks like there's a lot of proactive people on this call that are trying to make a difference, and I appreciate that. I hope you all have a great night.
Indeed. Thank you, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Have a good night.